Coming up in this episode of iCantCU, I'll tell you what director of what state agency called me a four-letter word. Oh, no, he didn't. Oh, yes, he did. Stick with me.
From Studio B in Swarthmore, this is the iCantCU podcast with David. It's like blind people for dummies.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of iCantCU, your window into a world where blindness doesn't dictate ability. My name is David, at David Benj on all the socials. I really appreciate you joining me for this episode. Thank you so much, and welcome inside Studio B. Pretty much status quo since the last time I recorded, which is great, because on Friday of this week, we're going to work on the sound equipment for state convention in about 8 months, so we can learn it. Someone in a state agency, a state employee from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, called me a dick. And to back up, let me just give you a little idea of who that might be. I've mentioned the Business Enterprise Program many times in my podcast episodes over the years. And over the last couple of years, I've been going to the meetings that they have semi-annually, usually in April or March, and usually again in October, when the vendors all get together and they have this meeting with this state agency that oversees the program here in Pennsylvania. The Business Enterprise Program came about in 1936 with the Randolph-Sheppard Act. And what that act said, it gave priority to blind merchants to operate vending machines and grab-and-goes, blind bodegas, as I call them, cafeterias, and things like that on federal property. And then over the course of time, each state came up with what is usually called a mini Randolph-Sheppard Act within that state. In Pennsylvania, there are facilities in some state properties, and in some states like Ohio, you can find blind vendors operating in the state university system there. Now, how great would that be? Because you got a bunch of college kids, and they always want to eat and stuff from vending machines, have sodas, whatever. So it's different from state to state. And in the state of Pennsylvania, the BEP program, with the exception of the 20 vendors who are in it, has not had a new operator come online since 2020. 5 years. There has been no training for 5 years. They have promised us that it will happen this year, but that still remains to be seen. So I have been going to these meetings. I attended the first one. The first one that I went to was a virtual one. I want to say it was back in 2022. I'm not 100% sure when it was. I know we were in this house, but I don't remember if it was 2021, 2022. I believe it was fall, but again, not sure. And once they started having them in person again, I would go to Harrisburg to the L&I building, Labor and Industry, and go to the meetings there. Now, there was one instance where I traveled to Harrisburg, spent the night in a hotel because the meetings start at 9. It's really almost impossible for me to get there by 9 o'clock if I left from my house that morning. There's an early train that I could get to that would get me into Harrisburg at around 8:15 or 8:30, but it would be so early that I would have to leave. It would just be almost, I wouldn't be coherent enough during the meeting to make it worth my while to go. So when I do go to the meetings, I would stay in a hotel. One time I stayed at the Crowne Plaza. One time I stayed at the Hilton. Actually, maybe more than once I stayed at the Crowne Plaza. In fact, the time that I went and stayed at the Crowne Plaza for one of the meetings, the meeting was canceled at 9 p.m. the night before the meeting. after I had obviously checked into the hotel, after I spent for my train ticket. The train ticket is the cheapest part of the whole scenario because from Philadelphia to Harrisburg and back, round trip, as I've mentioned a few times, is only $35, give or take. Might be 35 and change, 34 and change. I don't remember the exact amount. Let's call it 35. So I made my reservation. They had a deal with the Best Western premiere in Harrisburg, which again is where we have some blind merchant events. We had the holiday party there. We have the spring fling coming up, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that in a minute. I made my reservation there. We also have the NFB of Pennsylvania state convention coming up there in November. I've been to a few other meetings there. It's a very nice place, very nice. As I've mentioned before, you don't think of this hotel when you hear the words Best Western. And again, it's called Best Western Premier, and it is great. It is a great facility. Make my reservation. Pam Baccaro, who is the president of the Blind Merchants Association here in Pennsylvania, sent me the link. I made my reservation. About a week later, I get a call from Pam saying that there can be no one from the public invited. And the discussion was during a meeting of the SLA, the state licensing agency, and the executive committee made up of the vendors. They consider it training. They don't consider it a public meeting. And there was some back and forth when talking about the public, because typically the public has been me and Lynn. Lynn had gone to one meeting. I had gone to 2 or 3. I don't remember how many. And the person, the director of the BEP here in Pennsylvania, his name is Wes. And he said, when you bring those people, you brought those people, meaning Lynn and I. And they were out of line, and they were some other words. All that we did when Lynn and I were there, and all that I've done when I've been at that meeting or an OVR meeting where Wes's boss, Dawn, is in attendance, is ask questions. When is it going to be open again? When can we bring more people into the program? When can that happen? I don't know everyone's age in the group. Again, there's around 20 vendors in Pennsylvania, down from about 200 at its height. A majority of them, I'm guessing, are 50 and older. There are some who are under, and there's a few who are very young, which is nice because you need those young folks to keep the program going. But I know there's a few people well over 60. And some are going to want to retire soon. So what happens when they retire? Or when there is a facility, whether it's a cafeteria, a grab and go, a micro market, whatever you want to call it, a blind bodega, or a vending route. And vending routes can be in prisons. They could be in those rest areas along the interstates. In fact, when we went to Erie, we actually went into a rest area where someone in the merchants had a facility there. And I want to say they had maybe 8 or 10 machines. And what happens when they want to retire? Or they just physically can't do the job anymore? If there's not another person in the program who wants to take that location, it then gets contracted out to a third party. To me, it almost seems, and I don't know this is true, to me it almost seems like there is something going on behind the scenes from some of those third-party contractors, whether it's to folks in the program, in the BEP itself, meaning on the state side of it, or the vendors to say, hey, look, let's leave that open and I can help you out. I don't know that that's true. And maybe just Wes is in my head and he knows that that's what I'm thinking. And I'm not the only one that thinks that way. But going back and forth with Wes and the executive committee, Wes says he's a dick. He was talking about me. He didn't mention my name specifically, but they were only talking about two people, me and Lynn. We were the only two folks that Pam brought to a meeting. She was hoping to bring somebody else to a meeting because he is also interested in becoming a blind vendor and joining the program. But again, there's training. I think there may be one person on the state side that may be blind. I'm not 100% sure, but for the most part, the entire office is sighted. There has been an issue where training is going to be. There is a place in Johnstown which is very difficult to get to if you're blind. If you're disabled in any other way, meaning you can see okay, but maybe you're deaf, or maybe you're paraplegic, where you could drive yourself there, it's not an issue. But it is very difficult to get to Johnstown, PA, if you can't drive. And that's where they want to have the training. The executive committee doesn't want it there. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on there. It seems like the SLA is going to force it in. And that would be bad. Previous times when training was there, many of the instructors wouldn't allow the blind folks to do everything necessary to operate a grab and go, a blind bodega. And you know what they sell at blind bodegas and grab and goes? Sometimes they sell fresh sandwiches or maybe some prepared foods, things like that. Well, what do you have to do? You've got to cook them. And you got to use knives and you got to use ovens and whatnot. They wouldn't allow them to use different things in there. I'm not saying that's how it's going to be once it goes back there, if that's where it goes back. But to me and to most of the others, whether they're in the program or in the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania, think that it would be better to do some sort of training online and then go to one of the micro marts where these folks operate and be trained by the people who have already been running these facilities, whether it's the vending. And the vending is a very different animal than the micro marts, because the vending, depending on the time of year, if you're on a rest stop on an interstate, maybe you only have to fill it twice a week. In the summer, maybe 3 times a week. And I'm not saying they're going to be close to your home. I know the one person drives a couple hours to get to his satellite location. He has 2. So I know that you got to drive a little bit. So it's not an easy thing, but it's not an everyday thing. When I finished working at the blind bodega with Kirk, he then moved from that. He gave that up and went back to a postal facility. And I'm not talking about let's go into the post office and pick up some stamps place. This is a giant 100,000 square feet, 200,000 square feet facility where forklifts are zooming around and all sorts of activity is going on. Obviously, during the fourth quarter, that place is crazy busy with all sorts of packages coming in. So obviously, that's a time when you might need to be in there 3 or 4 times a week to refill the 30 to 50 machines that are in there. They are in little pockets around the building. A set of 6 here, a set of 3 over there, a couple up there, 4 over there. So you've got to go from one to another. You got to figure out what you need and you got to load them up. And again, it's a physical job because you're lifting the sodas and you're lifting all this stuff. But it's, okay, the Coke goes in this. Okay, I'm going to put all these Cokes in this one. And the Sprite goes in here and you put the Sprite in there. And you're checking the machine to make sure there are no issues with it. You're repairing the machines, and that's a big issue. Sometimes you probably have had an issue where you put a bill in and nothing happens, or it won't take the $5 bill or the $1 bill or whatever you're putting in. And so you start to pound on the machine. Well, sometimes when you pound on the machine, you break it. So that happens. Sometimes people try to break into the machine so the front glass is broken to get to the product. So there's all sorts of repairs, but again, it's something that is not an everyday thing to have to go to the facility to load it and run it. When I worked for Kirk at that place, I was going in 4 hours a day, and we were going in every day because he had just taken it over, and so we were repairing things. I wasn't repairing things because I am not mechanically inclined, and my fingers don't work that great, but to put sodas in, that I could do. To put snacks in, that I can do. That's not an issue, and that's what I did. So these are the places that the Business Enterprise Program has for blind vendors in Pennsylvania, and to think that there are only 20, down from a couple hundred, and to think that a lot of the folks are over 50, it makes it hard to imagine in 5 years or 10 years what's going to happen with the program in Pennsylvania. Now, I was in Baltimore last week for about 5 days for a seminar down at the National Federation of the Blind headquarters there. And I talked to a couple of people who are blind vendors in other states. One guy named Frank, who everybody got us confused. They thought we were the same person. and Frank Frank is in the program. Obviously, I am not. Frank is from New Mexico. And we talked about it. I asked him a few questions about it. And one of his concerns was if what's happening now with all these downsizing of these federal places, what's going to go in those buildings? There might not be enough people in there to keep the business going. And that has been an issue since COVID because the folks have been able to work from home. One of the guys who operates a facility in Harrisburg at the Labor and Industry Building, I don't remember if people have to be in the office 1 day a week or 3 days a week, but whatever it is, it makes it hard to sustain the business. It makes it hard to order because you don't know how many people are going to be coming and going each day. And you can't overorder because a lot of it is food that has an expiration date. All sorts of uncertainty nationally because of what's going on in the federal government right now. And as far as it goes in Pennsylvania, there's issues because of, like I just said, not everybody's back in the office full time. If that were to happen, and I saw this when I was at the IRS building in Philadelphia when I worked at Kirk's Blind Bodega, when it went from mandatory 1 day a week to be in the office to 3 days a week, business took off like you wouldn't believe. We had trouble keeping the shelves full because it was unexpected. Nobody said, hey, we're going to be back in the office 3 days a week now. So it made it difficult to run. We were constantly, after we closed, running to different places to get product. And Kirk was a little disappointed because it was as that trajectory was on a hockey stick growth that he was leaving that one to go to the vending at the post office. It was for the better for him, though. Kirk has some health issues, and to go in every day, and it's 5 days a week, it's not every day. Now, Pam has a blind bodega at the post office facility in Harrisburg where she has vending and she has a micro mart. She keeps it open 24 hours a day. It is similar to the Amazon, I forget what the stores are called, where basically you go, you take something off the shelf and it records it, and you don't really go through a checkout. It records it unless you put it back. It records it as you buying it. And so it's similar to that. So she opens on Monday morning and then closes on Saturday morning, sometime in the morning. A lot of folks watch out for, and there's ways that there can be shrinkage, and Kirk had a lot of shrinkage at the IRS building, and that was discouraging. We would find wrappers around the store. Most of the folks at the IRS building, I'm guessing, who would wonder who would risk their jobs stealing from a $2, $3 candy bar, $2 candy bar, whatever it was. And that's pretty much what it is. It's like a convenience store. We sold hot dogs and soft pretzels and sodas and other drinks. Energy drinks were were big sellers. Hot coffee, hot tea, things like that. So who would risk their job if they had a job with the IRS to steal something like that? Bag of chips. Maybe it wasn't the folks who are doing the IRS work. Maybe it's other folks in the building doing maintenance and whatnot. Maybe they're not making the kind of salaries that the folks in the IRS were making, which were pretty decent salaries. That's why Liz applied there. That's a story for another day, and I'll find an episode. There was an episode I talked about her working there and how that all went down and how it didn't happen. And it's probably good at this point because she may be looking for a job right now if she had been working there. For the business enterprise program in Pennsylvania, to not have training up over 5 years, it is just wrong. And we've heard rumblings that they're going to rewrite the mini Randolph-Sheppard Act for Pennsylvania at a cost of a few $100,000. And it just the whole operation, it just seems to me something is going on somewhere that is not helping blind people. If they can't get somebody in, if you can't go, I wanted to do the program, and 2 or 3 years ago, I told them I was interested, and I was told by my counselor at the Bureau of Blindness and Visual Services, that program is closed. And I immediately called Pam when I got off the phone with the counselor, and she said, no, it can't be closed. And the next day, somebody must have told this woman that I was asking, because Pam might have mentioned it to her contacts in the program at the state. My counselor called back and said, it's not closed, but training isn't happening. And I said, I know training's not happening, but I want to make sure that when training is coming, that I can get in there. And at this point now, being over 60, I don't know that I want to do that. Because by the time I would get through training, and I don't know what training is going to look like once it actually does start again. But we're talking at least another year. And in a year from now, I'm going to be 61 years old. I would love for Liz to be able to leave Walden where we could work together, especially on if we had a vending place or two where we could load up the car, load up the machines a couple times a week, work on the business from home because we could do all the paperwork from here. Now, the machines today are pretty sophisticated. They take credit cards. They tell you how many of each thing have sold. It's not like back in the day where when I had the video store and I had the machines out front, I'd go out on Monday morning and open it up and say, oh, we're low on this, we're low on that. I've got to bring those out. I'll load them up, take the money out. It makes it a lot easier. And there's still a good chunk of money in there. And that becomes a problem in some of these places because, like I said, people try to break in to steal the money. But it is pretty sophisticated to know that if it's offline, if it's extra busy, so it makes it easy. Yes, maybe you got to drive 2 hours to get to it, but you know what you need before you go. It wasn't like back in the day when I had the West Coast video where I would open the door and say, write down a list of everything we need because we didn't have iPhones then. Write down a list of, okay, I need 2 of this, 1 of that, 3 of that, whatever. And then go in the back into the storage room and get those and put them in a cart or a hand truck and bring them out front and load the machine. It's not like that because, again, you're traveling sometimes a couple hours. Like I said, you can't go to the thing, drive back, get what you need, then go back. That's silly. So before you go. So it is a great way. A lot of people make very good money doing the business enterprise program. And again, it's different in each state. And more than a couple of people, and one person who has told me multiple times, and he kind of reminds me of my dad. He lives on the other side of the state. He said, "You got to get in this because it is the best thing that ever happened to me." He's running his own business. He's making a very good living doing this, and he loves it. And that was when I first thought about doing it, that was the key. I thought, okay, I should do this. And we'll see what happens once training finally does open up, whether I go for it or not. And in the meantime, I guess I'll still be battling Wes and Dawn and just trying to get answers. And that's the part that kind of bothers me, that we have to keep pushing and keep fighting. It always seems like we're fighting for something, and we are, whether it's the rideshare folks not picking up people with guide dogs, or blind kids not getting any kind of Braille instruction in school. How are they going to function in society if they can't read? And you can't count reading as taking out your iPhone or using some sort of device to listen to what's there, because that doesn't always work. They have to be able to read a physical book. The way a blind kid reads a physical book is with Braille. I've never been disappointed more than the last few years of not knowing Braille, because if I had learned it by now, even with my hands the way they are, I might still be able to do it. But I've tried multiple times, and trying to just figure out a letter, going letter by letter, it would take me forever to read. And I was discouraged by my O&M instructor. You'll never be able to read, even if you were to learn Braille, more than a couple of lines. You're not going to be able to read a book. And that was discouraging. And when I told Lynn about that, the National Federation of the Blind president, Lynn Heights, she couldn't believe that an O&M instructor would say something like that to discourage people from learning. And this is going back probably 10 or 15 years, maybe more, 20 years maybe. So we'll see what happens with the business enterprise program in Pennsylvania. But on that same note, on the 17th of May, the Pennsylvania Association of Blind Merchants are having what we're calling the Spring Fling. It's at the Best Western Premiere in Harrisburg. It goes from 4 to 10. And we're going to have blind vendors there, not necessarily in the business enterprise program, but folks who have businesses who are blind. And they may be something I know there's one person confirmed, he does woodworking and makes things like that. There is a guy who I also believe is confirmed, has something called a cane keeper, which it's basically, and I have one, and I lost it for the longest time, and then Liz found it within the last few months. The foldable canes, what do you do with them when they're dripping wet? You don't want to put them in a backpack because they're wet, and they've been sweeping along dirty streets, and who knows what, you've touched dead animals, dog poop, whatever. You put it in this thing. It's kind of like a quiver type of thing that you can hook onto your belt or onto your backpack, and that's the only thing that goes in there. He's going to be there, I believe. And tickets are $25. We're going to have raffles. We're going to have an auction, a couple of auctions on different items, and we get some great items. For the holiday party, we had the Meta Ray-Ban sunglasses, which are the ones that record up to 3 minutes, where you can then post it on social. We had packs of Scratcher lottery tickets that I believe they were holiday packs, and I want to say there were 100 in a pack. They were dollar tickets, and so we had a few packs of those. A lot of great things, and it's obviously still coming together. I'm working on the flyer, and since I was away, I hadn't worked on it in about a week. I'm working on that, but if you want to buy tickets, you can go to pablindmerchants.org/fling. I'll put a link in the description. pablindmerchants.org/fling. If you are a blind merchant, whether you're in the business enterprise program or you just own a business and you want to show what you do, your product or service, tables are $50, which gets you one admission ticket too. So you can eat and there's going to be food. That's what your $25 gets you. There's a whole bunch of food we're going to have. And a cash bar, not an open bar, not for that. $50 gets you a table. If you need electricity because it's something that you need to show off, that's another $25. That's the price that the hotel is charging us to get electric to that table. So if you're a blind merchant, I don't have a link up yet for that. But if you are interested, please reach out to me, iCantCUpodcast@gmail.com, and we will get everything situated. Again, if you want to buy tickets, and you can buy up to 100 tickets, again, go to pablindmerchants.org/fling. That'll take you right to the checkout page of PayPal where you can punch in how many you need. You can buy one, you could buy 100, or somewhere in between. You don't need a PayPal account. You could use your regular credit card. You don't need to have PayPal to do it. pablindmerchants.org/fling, FLING. Again, there'll be a link in the show notes and description. So please, if you're in the area, in the Harrisburg area, or if you want to travel, again, if you're in Philadelphia, it's an easy trip out there. There are also discounted rooms in a room block at the Best Western Premier, which now that I think about it, I have to make my reservation. So I will have a link to that in the show notes. I don't have that set up yet. I will have that set up at pablindmerchants.org/hotel, but I don't have that set up yet. You can try that if you're listening to this a couple of weeks later, but I don't have that set up yet. We had just gotten the hotel link right before I went to Baltimore. But I would love to see you there. Obviously, I'll be there. I'm debating on whether having digital graphics have a spot there. I'm leaning to no because I have a lot of other things to do during this event, so I don't have anybody else who can man the table. In the next episode, I'll talk about my trip down to Baltimore, but again, a very worthwhile thing that I went to down there. I was very excited to be included in it. That's it for this episode. I really do appreciate you joining me for it. I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out, 646-926-6350. You've got up to 3 minutes. Please leave your name and your town. If you do leave a voicemail, and I will probably use it in an upcoming episode. Again, 646-926-6350. Let me know if you've got questions, comments. You know a blind vendor who may be interested in coming to the event. I'd love anything you've got. 646-926-6350. Or again, you could reach out via email, iCantCUpodcast@gmail.com. Please check out the show notes page. The show notes, once the video is up, will also have the video. That will be at iCantCU.com/282. iCantCU.com/282, numerically speaking. And remember, iCantCU sounds like a whole sentence, but it's only 7 characters long. iCantCU.com/282. You can also reach out to me on the socials at David Benj, DAVIDBENJ. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn. I know there's more. There's more. If there's a social, look for me at David Benj. And in the next episode, I'll tell you about my OnlyFans page. No kidding. That's not at David Benj. That was taken. I'll tell you next time. So that's another reason to come back. Again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I really do appreciate it. Be well, stay safe, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the iCantCU podcast with David. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. And don't forget to share the podcast with your friends.